Hello again, Colleen Joy. Great to connect with you.
Oh, lovely to be with you again.
Lovely. Today we are going to do the second in our Wisdom Dialogues with Colleen Joy series in Odyssey Magazine. And the topic we're looking at today is the topic of holding space. It's a term that is bandied about generically when someone is experiencing great difficulty, illness, sadness, grief, loss, any of those things where someone will send them a message and say, I'm holding space for you. But very often the person or the recipient does not know what holding space means. What is holding space, Colleen Joy?
So at the deepest place of seeing, I think it may be helpful to check into this, to access this possibility that the true self, what we really are, is the space. So it's not like my little body, my little Colleen body is trying to project a little space. It's actually to realize that what we essentially are is a space that even our body and our mind are in. So whether we are conscious of this or not, we already hold space. We already are the space for thoughts, for feelings, for sensations. We are already the space for that. Being conscious about this means that we are more free of the contents of that space. It gives us room to not be sucked in and have our nervous system be fully overwhelmed by the contents of that space. When I know that I am the space in which this song of sadness is playing, I can be very compassionate and present to that song without being overwhelmed by it. If I think that I am that sadness or that stressful song, I can very easily be hypnotized by it and my body and my mind can be overwhelmed by it. And it's the same when we are supporting others. If I think that I am this little human being, this little separate self, and this little separate Colleen is trying its best to support somebody in pain and suffering, it's quite easy to get overwhelmed by their songs of suffering as well. It can be exhausting, it can be depleting. And believe me, when I forget this, and I do forget this, I feel the drain, I feel the exhaustion. So what I do for myself is then I check in, I do a little meditation, I do a little bit of mindful, just noticing really, and I remind myself, I look again to remember, to realize, to see, oh, this is a song in me. I am not my fear is in me. I am not this other person's song. This other person's song is in me. And the moment that happens, we have more room. There's more, we energetically, emotionally, we are resourced now because we feel, there's a little breathing room. I'm now the space in which this is happening. Then in terms of practically how we might use this understanding to really give people something without needing to say a word. I call it intuitive support without necessarily even needing to speak. This is something that I learned in very tough situations when my daughter, who's now in her 20s, when she was born with very serious health problems. That was more than 2 decades ago. And she had her first surgery at 14 hours old. She had more than a dozen surgeries before she was 2. And you can imagine that being in hospitals, it's often very overwhelming for people. Illness, medical jargon, especially if they're not used to it. I had a childhood of being in hospitals and having a medical destiny, so I was already fortunately quite used to that world. But still, how do we support ourselves? How do we support each other? So what I learned to do out of sheer desperation, to be honest, is that if I focused on my daughter when she was in pain, that little body, that little baby body, innocent in severe pain, my body, my heart, my mind would just want to collapse, right? The severity of the trauma was such that it felt like it was going to rip me into 1,000 pieces. So out of sheer necessity, I would first of all honor that, acknowledge that, because you can't get around it. As Helen Keller taught, the only way out is through. You unfortunately can't skip around the pain. So first, I would take a moment to acknowledge and to really be present to the trauma and the song of pain. And then set a simple intention. And my mind would say, oh, you're mad, you're making this up, you're nuts. But I would just, lovingly hear the thoughts and set an intention. And my intention was this: to tune in to a different radio station in my baby daughter. So instead of tuning into her pain and her suffering, to go deeper than that for her essence, for her soul, for her truth. And whatever word we choose doesn't matter. You experiment and find what works for you. What worked for me was the word truth and the word soul. So I would say to myself, I'm going to just tune in deeper than her pain, deeper than her suffering, for the truth, for her soul. And my mind, honestly, thoughts would just be running like, you're making this up, you don't know what you're doing, you probably, but I would just park that and do it anyway. And how I knew that the radio station had changed is because now a new song was available to me. Instead of that deep trauma, there would be a whisper of peace. There'd be a whisper of strength. And I would stay with that. I would stay as if I was now hearing a new song. Or if I was cold, sitting near a window, suddenly feeling a little beam of sunlight. There's a physical change that can tell us we've changed radio stations. Also, often, not always, I would notice she would calm. And I wouldn't look for that as evidence. I would still continue to do this. But I have seen many times that when we do this, we can actually support. So I would suggest that holding space, notice you are the space. Be loving and compassionate to the songs that rise in your own body and the songs that come from our loved ones and from the collective, from the ocean of us. And then experiment with setting an intention to tune in deeper than the surface of people, their pain and suffering. And set your intention. This is not a visualization. This is not a theoretical, abstract thing. It's a very felt thing. And you just set your intention. I'm going to open to the deepest part of them, their truth, their soul. And I'm just going to notice how that affects my own body and just sit with that. And I promise you, it sounds very simple, but that alone is deeply supportive, and it keeps us also, I think, in a place of reverence. And just one other thing about this, which my soul and my intuitive inner wisdom would be very clear on, is to not add my personal agenda to that support. So my mind would want something, my ego wants something. It wants my daughter to get better. It wants the pain to go away, which is completely understandable. But it was very important for this to be true and for this to be helpful, to honor that deep truth, to honor whatever that was, and not to add an agenda, like grabbing for an outcome. Now, this takes courage, Because what it actually meant is that if I was supporting somebody, that support may be supporting them through a dying process. It may be supporting them through a physical healing process, but that it wasn't up to me to decide in my own little limited Colleen mind what was best for that person and their journey and their soul. And this is tough, this is tough. I needed to support my daughter, for example, seeing her as equal to her own destiny, seeing the strength and the soul behind the suffering and honoring that regardless of the story and the outcome and setting aside my personal agenda.
Colleen, do you think that when we hold space at that level, we are connecting with someone on such a very deep soul level, soul to soul, I suppose, for want of a better word, that they sense that comfort?
Absolutely. I can actually think of so many examples, Deborah. Many years ago, I had a student who was, and these stories are so relevant right now, but it's been a part of my destiny, I suppose. But anyway, many years ago, I had a student whose mom was very ill, and she was not able to travel to see her mom. And her mom was basically probably in her last weeks. And she had tried to fly to see her mom a few times, but it had become financially impossible, logistically impossible to keep going to see her mom. So she said to me, Colleen, what can I do? Because I feel so powerless. I feel so powerless right now that I can't be there for my mother. And of course, our hearts break because we know how many folks and how many people are very alone in their suffering and in their struggle right now. And I suggested to her that she experiment with this if she was interested. And I said, like I've experienced in my own life, your mind's going to probably think you're making this up. But if you feel drawn to it, do it anyway. And at the very least, you'll feel like you're doing something. And I suggested to her that she might think of her mom and imagine that she was tuning into her mom's radio station, the song of her mom. Because with a little bit of sensitivity, we know that everyone has a feeling. I like to call it like a song or a signature. Deborah has a Deborah-ness. the way Deborah, there's a signature, there's a feeling that we recognize if we pay attention. We know, our loved ones, we know the song. And so I suggested that she set an intention to feel the song of her mother, to actually to feel it in her own body and just be with that for a moment. And then the second part of it was then to set an intention to tune in through that mom song, through the suffering or through whatever she was picking up on, and just to set the intention to connect to her mom at a deeper level, the soul, the truth, without concepts, very important, without conceptual ideas, because these words are so loaded, aren't they, Deborah, with semantics and bazillions of teaching. So it's very important to almost put that aside and be willing to discover these things for ourselves and stay very simple and stay very practical and very much in the experience. And I suggested she do this. She said she would like to try. I saw her a couple of weeks after that, and she came to me and she said, Cole, she says, I've been doing this regularly, and it's so comforting for her, first of all. And I said, that's wonderful. And then she said, yeah, but there's something else that's been happening. Her sister actually is there every day with her mom. And her sister phoned her a couple of days later and said to her, it's the funniest thing, Mom has started talking to you. So the mom, in her delirium, in her illness, has started talking to you, sister, as if you are there. And when she's talking to you, she calms down, she settles, she seems to feel more peaceful and she seems to be in a state of peace. How odd is that, she said. And then my student just smiled and knew that therefore she something was happening, something that she didn't need to claim, or it comforted her, in other words. So we all know stories of this. We know stories of thinking of loved ones for no reason and finding out that they indeed were experiencing something painful, and we randomly thought of them. We are obviously all interconnected, and I don't think this is even strange. I think it's a very natural, beautiful thing. And so we can listen, and we can also listen. We can tune in. Now, when I started my career as a speaker, for example, my very human shyness that I used to struggle with was always in the way. But what I would do is I would set my intention to, first of all, tune into my own deeper strength and soul, which would ease the programs in my own body and mind around shyness. But also for my audience, instead of tuning into 1,000 people and their eyeballs and their judgment and their, all of that, which freaks out our nervous systems completely, I would just set the intention. Again, even though my mind would, not anymore, but it used to comment a lot about how I was nuts and all that. And I thought, I don't care if it makes me feel better at the time. And I would just set this intention to tune in to the audience at the deeper level, at the place of truth. And what this would give my body was suddenly like a feeling of strength and peace. And very noticeably, instead of them feeling like strangers, they would suddenly all feel like family. And I over time, I decided that little argumentative voice eventually just fell away. It couldn't survive the very tangible change, the very physical change that can happen, where suddenly an audience that felt threatening and felt hostile and felt separate to me would suddenly feel like brothers, and, like, without sounding cliched, truly would feel like family. The best of what the word family means, because I know the word family doesn't work for everyone, but real close, real kin. And of course, when that happens, the experience of life has just changed. So right now, it's our challenge, all of us, because it's so easy to feel polarized right now and to feel scared and hostile, is to feel deeper always, even for those that disagree with us, even for those that push our buttons, even for those of us that say things that we don't agree with. Can we challenge ourselves to go deeper and to feel the soul underneath?
I think that's really powerful, and I think it's a concept that confused a lot of people in terms of what you're supposed to be doing as the supporter and the enabler. Is there a recipe for, holding space? And I think that makes it so clear that it really is connecting into the deepest part of you and the deepest part of the person who you are, attempting to hold space for, or comfort. I think comfort is a word. When we're holding space, we're trying to offer some level of comfort to that person, and it's as simple as a connection. And I think that really takes away the complexity of the word and the concept for which books have been written about.
True, Deborah, absolutely. And something else that that pops up for me. Okay, so back to the word intention. If our intention is truly to support someone, if our intention is truly to hold that space and support, then it is necessary to park our own personal agenda and to be that space, and to sometimes say nothing, and sometimes to say very little. When someone else is in trauma or in high agitation, it's very unhelpful to offer advice, to try and help them see clearly, to even have a dialogue. And I'm sure everyone has encountered how unhelpful it is to try and do this in texting. I mean, trying to support folks by texting each other. Texting is not an ideal place. We've all seen how quickly comments on a feed or WhatsApps or SMSs or telegrams or whatever it is, we've all seen how quickly people get very, very much planting flags in sands and polarized and building forts around their points of view and going hostile. And it's a very unpleasant, very unhelpful place. And I don't think the intention there is support. I think that the intention is proving one's right or trying to vocalize something that one feels is very important. But have we ever seen anyone on any of those forums say, oh, based on what you've said, I now completely have changed my mind? We've never, that would be a day it might snow in South Africa. So I feel, looking at our intention, why do I want to post something? Why? And it's not to judge ourselves, it's just to be honest. If my intention is, I care about this topic so much, I feel it's important for other people to hear, well, then is this the way to get someone to hear? How are we best heard? And I've found that it's just counterproductive to think that shouting in amongst the noise is going to result in us being heard. I've found that the best way to be heard is to first listen, and to listen with the intention of understanding. And not many of us, even myself perhaps on some Mondays, struggle with this. I have to remind myself of everything I teach, by the way. But it's like, what is my intention right now? What is my intention? I think it's very clear. And then to realize, to support someone who is in stress, who is suffering, often the truly best support is to listen without agenda, to not give advice, to not direct, but literally to be that unconditional space that listens without an agenda. Never underestimate the power of that. When somebody is out of trauma, out of deep fear, out of that very reptilian brain physical survival response that human bodies default to, then there is the opportunity possibly to start dialoguing, to start considering. But in order to be heard, we then first need to truly hear and to be humbled to understanding the positive intentions of other people, especially the ones we disagree with.
Okay. I think that makes a whole lot of sense. And I think it gives people who are wanting to support others a better grasp of what it is they're supposed to be doing. And texting and phoning and giving advice is really not the way to hold space, but rather to be this objective, unconditional listening partner for whom they can share whatever it is they're feeling at any point in time, I would imagine.
I think that if one is interested in wisdom, if this resonates, then that could be very helpful. I find that helps me. It doesn't always work in the sense of seeing a result that my ego wants, but in terms of honoring the deeper wisdom that really feels so unconditional and really understands that ultimately all souls are doing the best they can with their history and with the apps that they have installed in their minds and their hearts. And then there is just compassion, really. There is just this deep sense of compassion. And my experience, Deborah, is that is the position or the way our souls see. The way my soul sees is what I've been teaching little Colleen, in this little package of thoughts and programs and software and hardware. I'm still continuing to teach. But my soul sees things a little differently to the way a little human being sees. And it's quite radical, and folks don't often always easily understand, but it really sees with such, I think the word I always like is being equal to. We really are, we're equal to each other. Souls they don't ever feel superior. They don't feel inferior. Your soul feels equal to the worst of what it means to be a human and the best of what it means to be a human. And our souls know that given another time, in another place, if I had been in the life of Deborah, I would be Deborah. Who are we to say that I wouldn't be doing what Deborah does, or what my neighbor does, or what that person with their hate speech on. And over time, our souls work really hard over time to download more wisdom into the human body, into the human way of seeing. And that's not an easy feat. I must tell you, brave souls do earth and this.
Thank you very much. I think it's really given people an indication of almost what the expectation is when they hold space, and how there is no requirement. It is simply a truth, a deep connection, a deep facilitation of a process to allow the person to just share unconditionally. And I think that would help everybody who is holding space for someone right now in these times, So thank you, Colleen. We'll get back to you shortly on our next topic for the Wisdom Dialogues with Odyssey Magazine.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Stay blessed.